Good morning, everybody. And I was tagged over the weekend by my friend Kev at Seagulls Gather, and he was talking about the Terminator films, and he was asking my opinion on them. My opinion is this. There are two Terminator films, Terminator and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, in the same way that there are only three Indiana Jones films. What I find far more interesting, though, is the Dirty Harry movies. They're essentially James Bond films for adults. So, in response to his Terminator video, I'm going to make this about Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry, of course, first appeared in 1971. He was created by Harry Julian Fink and Rita Fink. He was played by Clint Eastwood, although he was not the first choice to play the role. That was Frank Sinatra, who turned it down because he had broken his wrist. John Wayne was turned down, so was Paul Newman. Steve McQueen had already made Bullet, and he said, no, I've already played a cop, I don't want to do that again. Clint Eastwood was basically the fifth choice to play the role, but looking back, he was the only choice to play the role. Clint Eastwood is by far my favourite actor, yes, even above Sean Connery. The man is just cool beyond words. He'd already made his name in things like the spaghetti western films. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly is one of the finest films you'll ever watch. Possibly from a storytelling point, a few dollars more is better. But I think The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, you can't go wrong in terms of cinematic enjoyment. And of course, he'd made Where Eagles Dare. I will come into that on another video at some point. So, let's rank the Dirty Harry films in order of preference. Now, there are five. Last place, I'm going to put The Enforcer from 1976. That's the one with Tyne Daly as his partner. He's up against basically this strike force that call themselves, they're basically a bunch of hippies, and they've got themselves a load of weapons. There's some good moments in it. The captain is completely useless, doesn't have a clue. He himself said he came from the personnel department, and he says, oh, my instincts say this and my instincts say that, and it's so obvious that he has no instinct whatsoever for law enforcement. Tyne Daly's a really, really good foil for Clint and Dirty Harry, and there's some really good byplay off of each other. I think the plot, though, is lacking. It's not the strongest of the Dirty Harry films. As a cop thriller in its own right, it's really good. It's a very good film. The ending, of course, takes place on Alcatraz. It sees Dirty Harry up against all these militant assholes, and he blows them up with a rocket launcher at the end. It's also the one where he drives the car into the shop and then guns everybody down who's holding everybody hostage, which is a good moment. He actually replaced this really talky scene, and Clint Eastwood said, this is kind of boring, let me just do this. Because, of course, he owned the production company that made the Dirty Harry films, so he could basically say what he wanted to do, and that was it. Overall, I think The Enforcer is probably the weakest of the bunch, although having said that, the Dirty Harry films are far above anything that's made now. I'd put them on a par with something like Bullet, or The French Connection, or any of those sort of 70s gritty thrillers. They really fit into that mold because they were made at that time, and they were made by people who are actually intelligent and wrote scripts that encourage you to actually think a little bit. Next up is the Deadpool. The Deadpool is the one, the last Dirty Harry film. It's the one with the reporter who says, I want to interview you because you're a legend, and somebody's made up this hit list of people that they're going to kill. On the surface, this does not seem to be very good, but if you actually watch the movie, it's a lot better than you might think. Some good action in it. He's got this guy who's almost like a Jackie Chan clone as his partner this time. It's one where he says, here's your cookie cutter, you shit out of luck, bang, and just kills him. He impales the guy with a harpoon gun at the end. I think overall the set pieces are better than some of the film itself in terms of the plot. I think it could have done with a little bit more work, but overall I think it's reasonably solid, it's watchable, and it's got Jim Carrey, who's mainlining heroin. Probably not too far from the truth, actually. Next up is Sudden Impact. That's the one with Sondra Locke. It's the one where she gets gang raped by all those nutties. And it's the one where Dirty Harry says, go ahead, make my day in the diner. That movie is basically made up of a whole bunch of individual scenes rather than any kind of story. just showing how cool Harry is. I mean, it's 7 or 8 years after the last Dirty Harry film. You can tell Clint Eastwood's just going through the motions. The plot is not really something you could string a whole film on. It was more like an episode of a TV show or something, maybe something like TJ Hooker or Miami Vice or something like that, which were the big cop shows at the time. Like I say, it's just basically a collection of scenes which show Harry how hard he is. You've got the bit where he grabs the guy in the elevator and he says, "You're just a piece of dog shit." You've got the scene where he says, "Go ahead, make my day." You've got the scene where he's chasing in a bus full of old people. He's chasing a guy on a motorbike and he just happens to pitch him over and then stick a gun in his face and he says, "Here's your rights." There's no real narrative thread going through it other than Sondra Locke going around blowing people's bollocks off. I do like the ending, although I don't think Sondra Locke would have had much of a face left at the end of it if what happened actually happened in reality, because she keeps being punched in the face by a bloke who's about 3 times her size, and all she's got is a little cut down her nose. I mean, wouldn't she just need a complete facial reconstruction or something? But anyway, Dirty Harry shows up with a massive handgun and it's even bigger than his 44 Magnum and just blows people's heads off with it. The bad guy gets a really memorable death. He doesn't just get shot. This is a thing in 80s and 90s action films. The bad guy just couldn't be killed once. He had to die 4 or 5 times over. If you look at Con Air, Cyrus the Virus, John Malkovich, he gets thrown through a window, he gets electrocuted, he gets the crap beaten out of him, and then he gets his head smashed in with a hydraulic pump thing. And in Broken Arrow, John Travolta, he gets the crap beaten out of him, thrown out of a train by a nuclear bomb, blown up, crushed by a train, and all while smiling. That was a big thing in 80s and 90s, which is something I love. But again, sudden impact falls in the middle of the heap. It's not bad, it's worth watching. Second up is the original Dirty Harry. Yeah, the one from 1971 is the one with Scorpio. It's the one where Dirty Harry stands on his leg to get information from them. It is a very, very gritty film. The Dirty Harry films aren't exactly action movies, although they morphed into that later on. To start with, they were very, very grounded. They were very gritty. Yes, he's anti-establishment. Yes, he tells the mayor, if I see someone who's chasing a woman and he's trying to rape her, I'm going to shoot the bastard. That just tells you everything you need to know about Harry right there. Lethal Weapon. The first Lethal Weapon is essentially just a remake of the first Dirty Harry, down to the scene where Harry has to stop the suicide jumper from jumping off a roof. Of course, the scene where he says, "Do you feel lucky? Have I fired 6 shots or 5?" is an absolute classic. I think the story is simple enough for it to be enjoyable, but it's got enough going on that make you think, is this really the way it is in terms of enforcing the law? Is this really how they have to do it? And then when you actually watch the news and you think, how many people actually get away with this stuff? It's quite frightening, actually, because of the way the law works and the rules and the regulations and stuff like that. And this is why Harry's ideas just don't fit. I think it's a very intelligent, very sharp, very grounded film. I think it's an absolute classic. It's not the first Dirty Harry film I ever saw. I actually watched it after my top choice, which is Magnum Force. Magnum Force is my absolute favourite Dirty Harry film. It's got an awful lot to say about what is right and what is wrong in terms of law enforcement. Harry's up against a bunch of vigilante cops who are wiping out all the nasty villains in San Francisco. It's got, of course, it's fairly obvious who the villain is from about the first 5 minutes into the film. Yes, it's still got the classy action scenes like the aircraft hijacking at the start. Only Harry could deal with it in that way. The scene where he goes to arrest the gangster and then it turns into a shootout where the gangster's car gets smashed by a crane. Great. The ending on the aircraft carriers, which are due to be scrapped, I think is a really, really great action scene. It is even more gritty and grounded than the first one. And it's based on true life stuff and things in Brazil. I mean, it even mentions in the film that all these death execution squads in Brazil were going around massacring bad guys and stuff in the 60s, which is actually true. And the story's kind of based on that. It was one of the original Dirty Harry scripts. When they originally wrote Dirty Harry, they had 5 different versions of the first film, and one of them was Magnum Force. And Clint Eastwood said, "I really like this, but I think a stronger introduction would be the script that was originally called Dead Right and actually became the first Dirty Harry." But yeah, Magnum Force is my absolute favourite Dirty Harry film. I think that film is really very well worth your time. I think it's extremely well paced. It has a lot going on. I think the scene where some little woman comes up to him and says, I want to go to bed with you, I think that could have been cut out because it adds nothing to the plot. If you took that part out, this would indeed be one of the best cop thrillers ever, because Harry is just so relentless in his pursuit of what he feels is right. And as I said, the Dirty Harry films are James Bond films for adults. There's no cool suaveness like you get in a Bond film. They are very much a product of their time, so some of the language and some of the references to things. There's a scene in the first Dirty Harry film when the guy walks up and he says, "Why do people call you Dirty Harry?" And this guy walks up and he starts saying he hates this person and this person and these people and these people. And if you show that to a modern audience, they will just absolutely freak out. There is no other way to describe it. And yeah, you just wouldn't get away with that in today's climate, unfortunately. But overall, I think that if you've never seen the Dirty Harry films, I think they're fantastic. I love Clint Eastwood. I mean, if you want to watch a cop film that he's in but not a Dirty Harry film, The Gauntlet is a good film. That's the one where he ram raids City Hall in an armoured bus. There's a couple of others. There's Coogan's Bluff. I don't think that's particularly strong, but it's basically the same setup as the TV show McCloud with Dennis Weaver. He plays an Arizona sheriff. He has to go to New York to get a villain back. He runs into all these cops who he clashes with. It's kind of like a prototype Dirty Harry, only it's nowhere near as clear cut and it's not as well staged. And actually, Clint Eastwood is really unlikable in that film. He just sets people up and he just comes across as a total dick. It could have been a lot better, I think. But then, of course, you've got stuff like Gran Torino. I read that Gran Torino was originally going to be a Dirty Harry film to wrap up the whole thing, but it was rewritten to be Walt Kowalski. I don't know how true that is, but again, Gran Torino is a fantastic film. But I honestly don't think you go wrong with watching any Clint Eastwood films. I mean, yeah, he's got a few clunkers in there, but so do all actors. But by and large, I think his films are absolutely rock solid. And he doesn't say much. He doesn't have to say much. He just turns up and scowls at you. What? Like that. You don't need anything else. And without Dirty Harry, you wouldn't have RoboCop, Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, or any of those films that came after it. Dirty Harry was the first and the best. So I will leave that there, and thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Ta-da.